Yeah, sure.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Lean Catalyst. I'm your host, Damon Baker. I'm the CEO of Lean Focus. And it's in this dynamic monthly 1 hour interview series that will bring together like-minded CEOs and leaders who've successfully embraced lean thinking to drive exceptional results. Through captivating conversations, we dive into their remarkable achievements, uncovering the strategies and insights and practical wisdom that have propelled themselves and their organizations forward. Each series features an in-depth interview with a distinguished CEO who has demonstrated extraordinary leadership in leveraging lean principles. And it's a great opportunity for sharing experiences, strategies, and valuable knowledge that others can apply to their own leadership journeys. So today it's my esteemed pleasure to introduce you to our guest, Ken Newsome, who is the CEO of Markel Food Systems. Ken, good morning.
Hey, good morning. How are you?
Doing well. I'll give you a short little intro here. So Ken leads the group, Markel Food Group Companies, which is part of Markel Corporation, almost like a Berkshire Hathaway, and we'll get into some of that here in a bit. And inside of Markel Food Companies is AMF Bakery Systems. These are all separate operating companies. Darden Bakery Systems and Solbern. With a strong commitment to being a partner of choice for bakers worldwide, he leads the company with a vision to deliver better, safer, and affordable food for families around the world, while building better lives for group's teammates, families, customers, and communities. Ken has a bachelor's degree in commerce from the University of Virginia, as well as an MBA from the University of Virginia Darden School of Business. It's been a while, Ken. Good morning. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. As you know, our journey began, close to 10 years ago. So it's nice to catch up.
Yeah, for sure. So for those that are not familiar with Markel and then Markel Food Group, if you could give the story of the company and kind of what the company does, the industry, the markets that it plays in.
Sure. I mean, I think you mentioned it best. Markel is considered a mini version of Berkshire Hathaway. If you do some Googling, you'll realize that a lot of similarities. And back in 2005, they wanted to do the Berkshire thing in terms of direct investing in businesses instead of just having shares of public companies. And through just circumstances and personal relationships, AMF Bakery Systems became the first Markel Ventures company. And you fast forward now nearly 20 years, Markel Ventures as an entity is over $6 billion of revenue. So it's a sizable organization. We're a piece of that. But it's been very interesting because we've had a capital partner whose vision is forever. And so we've not been dealing with some notion of selling it within a time frame. We don't have any debt, so we're not dealing with covenants. And we just worry about doing the best thing today. We talk about forever and today. Do the best thing today that has results for forever. And we've been doing that for 20 years now.
So I think your career story is very unique in that, if I remember correctly, you graduated from business school and then you get straight into running a business, like almost right away. Is that pretty close or?
Well, it's pretty close. I had a 2-year stint at McKinsey. I went to McKinsey to their operations practice, which is ironic that I was at McKinsey in 86 through 88 in Cleveland in their operations practice. I never heard the word lean. I never heard the word Toyota production system. But yeah, from there, I always wanted to get back to Virginia and run a manufacturing company, and had the chance to run a $40 million construction products company, roof trusses and concrete block and precast concrete and things like that, which I did a better job selling the guy to let me do it because, I mean, that was trial by fire.
I can imagine. And then from there, how did you stumble into, was it even Markel back then? Is that what it was?
No, it was AMF Bakery Systems. Like so many things in life, I had this dream of building a group of companies out of Richmond, Virginia. I always wanted to get back to Virginia, and had grown up in Virginia, and Richmond I just thought was a good place to live. And ironically, was leaving my 10th business school reunion doing the where am I now versus where I thought 10 years ago. And we're driving back to Atlanta with this high-tech medical thing that was about to blow up. And I told my wife, if anything were possible, we'd move back to Richmond, Virginia, put together a group of investors and buy a manufacturing company. And then I paused and said, but that's not possible. So I'm going to keep my head down and see what happens. And literally 10 days later, got a call from a recruiter about becoming the president of AMF. Called a business school professor about talking about the owner and found out the company was for sale. I knew the investment banker and I called him and said, how do I buy AMF Bakery Systems? And this is a true story. He said, well, do you know anything about the baking industry or the food industry? I said, no. He said, do you know anything about capital equipment and, engineer to order, that kind of manufacturing? I said, no. He said, well, do you have any money? And I said, no. And after a pause, he said, I guess you're just the guy we've been looking for, aren't you? And through crazy circumstances, and just really kind of showing up after every door got shut, he, sat down with the owner and did a deal. And it was a lot of UVA people. And it was a classic club deal in Richmond. And so I showed up in January of 1997, just turned 37, all ready to go, and immediately realized I was greatly over my head and didn't know what I was doing. And that's really kind of where my lean journey began, because I reached out to Phil Nicely, who you know well, who eventually became a Danaher executive. And he was kind of my mentor in the process.
So
And
was
I
this in the
said,
first
what
year
do I
that
do?
you recognized you needed that help, or
This was 6 months in.
6 months in?
This was 6 months in. And I went to Phil and said, Phil, I've never done anything like this. Do you have a book or something I can read? And he gave me Womack's Lean Thinking. And so
Yeah.
I went home and literally read Womack's Lean Thinking. And in it, it said, when you start doing these things, the old guys will warn you that you're going to bankrupt the company. And so I went back and started doing these things. And the old guy said, you're going to bankrupt the company. And I said, well, I guess Phil told me to read the book, and that's what the book said was going to happen. So it must be working.
You must be doing it
So that
right.
was,
I said
I
you're
must
correct.
be doing it right. So yeah, that was, 1997. It's nearly a 30-year journey.
So for those that don't know Phil Knisley, so Phil Knisley was at one time the group executive, and he became EVP in Danaher. So he had a group of companies, the industrial coating and marking businesses, and he was basically over a group of portfolio presidents in Danaher, and he was known for his very, I would say, deft approach at telling you your baby is ugly without offending you, but maybe offend you a little bit, but doing it in a way that was very diplomatic and empowering, to say the least. Very soft-spoken man. I've never heard him raise his voice one time in all the interactions I ever had with him. Probably one of the top 10 smartest people I've ever met in my life.
Yes. So that's why I very quickly realized he'd be a good mentor for me. This was before he had joined Danaher, but was affiliated with the Rails brothers at that point, and therefore had access to a lot of the Danaher tools. And
Yeah.
that's really where my journey began.
So he gives you the book. At one point, do you start like trying this stuff? Like, what was your involvement in it? How did you try to get others in the organization rally behind this idea that we're going to start doing lean? Because this is like the late 90s, right?
Yeah. And this is why, if you remember, you asked me to do this a year ago, and I said no, because I'm kind of embarrassed with where I am. Give me another year. And I don't know that, we're far from world class. What I would say is that as I look back on my lean journey, there's kind of the first, as horrible it is to say this, the first 20 years. And then this last period of time, which really began in more or less 2017. In the first 20 years, we were buying a company every year. We were either buying a company every year or maybe selling a company, because of course we got thrown into workout because we borrowed too much money. And Markel came in, and so My focus was really on the acquisition and integration of businesses. And so, again, kind of, Phil said it works. Phil is right, therefore do it. Um, at that point, I was a believer that lean was what you did, and if you just had the X matrices, which we have them going back for years, or you just have KPIs and we have going back for years, it all works. And I was so focused on the growth side of it, I, kind of just figured out the rest of the people would figure out how to integrate. Because I mean, it's just do the charts. Um, and it really wasn't until we kind of completed our acquisitions and I was trying to knit the whole thing together. And Phil was kind of my helpline. And at some point, I called Phil, and you talked about his approach being maybe a little bit rough. I'll never forget. He was talking to me, and he said, "Ken, it sounds to me like the biggest problem in your company is the person I'm talking to right now." So that was a typical.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a typical Philism. And that's when I said, can you connect me with someone who can help? And he said, yeah, there's this guy named Damon Baker who just left Danaher and started a consulting firm. Why don't you call him? And it was really, frankly, our conversations, Damon, and what came from us working together, because we had spent the year before you came in kind of preaching what we called the Markel way, which was lean as we understood it. And I'll never forget, you came in and you made this comment that you said, Ken, your problem is your organization doesn't know how to solve problems. And of course, like most CEOs, I bucked up and I said, what do you mean we don't know how to solve problems? We solve problems every day. And you pointed out, no, there's a difference between firefighting and understanding the root cause and fixing the process so you fix it forever. Um, and so really we began that journey, and what I would say was critical was that number one, we brought in an inside resource. If you remember, you helped us bring Slobodan in.
To lead the business.
And
Yeah.
and we created the Markel Business System, which was, the Danaher Business System, the Lean Focus, the Everybody Business System. We took the pieces, and a lot of it you guys obviously worked with us to create. And I think that it's funny. I look back and to use a three bears analogy. Slobodan came into an organization of unplowed ground. And as you know, the first plow to go into the ground has a very, very hard time. And I'm very grateful because if there was anyone built to, just keep pounding, it was Slobodan. Um, and when I think of MBS facilitation or MBS leadership, it's a combination of agitation and facilitation. And Slobodan was required to be an agitator, just given the hardness of the ground and the situation that we were in. You remember some of the interactions you had with our team. Um, it was a challenge given the organization, but it was really that commitment to Slobodan. And again, if you remember the very first leadership session that you led, Joe Zaleski, the guy who ran Reading Bakery Systems, he made the comment, "Oh, I get this now," in terms of it's about problem solving. I get this now. And he made the statement, "I wish we'd have done this, 3 years ago when we started talking about this, because that's when they understood it's not about the charts, it's not about the graph, it's about defining what you want, measuring what you want, and when you're not getting what you want, fixing it." And so I think by bringing Slobodan in, that was really the game changer, because what we then started doing was bringing in managers. We made that a requirement to come in. Early on, I was very, I was very hesitant not to bring in people with industry leadership and was more willing to defer to existing people with industry leadership for industry knowledge, as opposed to taking a change and bringing in somebody with the right mindset. We were forced to start bringing in leaders who came from a lean background. And then I think the real thing that pivoted this was when we created our own Markel Business System Leadership University, and we started taking our high potential next gen leaders and putting them through this program. And what that has done is created a bit of, they come out and there's an expectation that what they've been taught is actually used in the business when they come out. And we've found that kind of training our own leaders, so that not only do they come out with that mindset, but they then start raising the expectation of the people around them. We've now been, I guess we're in our fourth class of that. It's just really all of those things that add together and add together. But I mean, at the end of it, I think that I was a CEO who, was a preacher. You have some phrase about, don't be a preacher versus a practitioner, or the CEO who waves the flag as opposed to dives in. I think given the focus on acquisitions, I was too much of that CEO waving the flag, but not demonstrating my own mastery. And I'm far from a lean master, but demonstrating my own commitment, my own passion, my own unwavering to this. And I'm now at a point in my career where it's pretty clear to everyone it's non-negotiable, and it's pretty clear to everyone it's not going away. And what I'm doing is I'm demonstrating a willingness to get into the bowels of the organization, to help our people. Because Damon, one of the things that you said, I don't know that you remember it, because for me it was profound, is that lean is fundamentally about respect for the men and women who do the work. And in our organization, L1 are the people who do the work, and I'm down at L6, because our organization is about empowering the people who do the work, who show up every day, who care passionately about our customers and people. It's about empowering them, giving them the tools, giving them the training, giving them the authority to make decisions fast, to please our customers so that we win. And so I am just very, very focused on what we refer to as L3 and L2 leadership. L2 leadership is the frontline supervisors, the people who supervise the people who do the work. L3 is more or less the value stream leaders. I mean, 80% of my focus is on the training of those men and women, because that's where the work gets done. That's where customers are pleased. That's where value is created. That's where people are kept safe and engaged. And so we've got to make sure that we're developing those people in this mindset. And so that's where my focus is now, given this where I'm in my career.
I think, you think about your time allocation now versus 2017, it's completely flipped. And I don't remember if you even remember this conversation, because this was a tense one too. Where I think maybe in the first one or two times that we met, I asked to see your calendar and how you spend your time. Do you remember this conversation?
Yeah. I thought you were crazy and bureaucratic as some big company. Right. It's called my Lean Standard Work Calendar. I go over it every month with my people to make sure I'm doing the things I said I'd do.
Yeah, because I think what's really important, and you and I were talking about this before this webinar started, was your realization that MBS was not going to be deployed successfully in the organization by you talking about it and cheering for it, and preaching about it when you talked about earlier, that it really required your hands-on involvement in many different ways. And I think over time, that time allocation and where you apply that energy probably changes too, as the organization matures and learns more and becomes more capable, that you spend less time in certain areas, whether it be departments or levels or regions of your company or other companies in your platform. You go where the problems are. You go where the capabilities need to be based. So it's 80-20 thinking, right?
Yeah. No, that's right. Now the challenge in any organization is this whole skip level approach, and going to Gemba. So one of the things I've had to legitimize is, why, because I'm now the chairman of the company. I have presidents who run businesses, and some of these have regional leaders. So when you talk about L3, there can be a lot of layers between me and them. And it has, and people do kind of wonder at times, why is the CEO doing this? But
You're meddling. You and your kids
well,
are meddling.
no, what I'm trying to do is demonstrate that leaders teach. And what
Yeah,
I'm trying to do is demonstrate that we develop, go to the characteristics, the characteristics. Leaders are supposed to teach, and leaders are supposed to go to Gemba, and leaders are supposed to develop people. And I don't know how to help our L3 leaders be better L3 leaders unless I'm there watching them lead. To have them give a report is not them doing the job. That's like them telling me how they played the game as opposed to watching them play
yeah,
the game. And there have been a lot of people, oh, it makes people nervous. And my whole point is it's only makes them nervous talking to the managers because we haven't been there in the past. And if
yeah.
we'd been there in the past, it wouldn't be. And I think more than anything, I'm just not relenting. I might have been more sensitive to that, but I'm just not relenting, in part because every time I go, and what I do is I bring the managers with me. That's been the big thing that I don't do is go alone. Is I take the managers with me so that we can both step back and look at what's happening. And I think that to a large extent, one of the one of the big things for me to realize, and this was a real weakness in my leadership, um, is that problems, lean language. Problems are when there's a gap between the actual and the standard, right? That's a gap. That's a problem. Well, if you as a leader don't do a good job setting the standard, then I'm complaining about something that you don't realize is a problem because we've not clarified it. And so one of the things that we're trying to do without being prescriptive is define what good looks like. How do you conduct a session like this? Because how can I give you feedback on whether or not you did a good session unless there's some standard as to what a good session looks like? And again, that's something that you can feel the tension when we start talking about those things. But I don't know how to do that because if not, if you and I are giving feedback to a manager and it's just my opinion versus your opinion, that's what I refer to as a vanilla chocolate conversation. You like vanilla, I like chocolate. Okay, we talk for a while and then what happens? Nothing. The only way we can talk to whoever that leader is against a standard. Um, and
Isn't
and
that
and
such a
and
simple
that just
concept, right? Like you can take that concept in so many places. Think about it.
yeah. Because people love me, people and unfortunately, this is what I used to do. You have a problem, you get together, you talk about your problem. And you vent and you rant and you rave, and you can see I move my hands, so I move my hands a lot. And then we get done and we feel better because we talked about it, but we didn't decide anything. We didn't
Yeah.
take an action. We didn't analyze. We vented our emotion as to what the problem is, but we never defined the problem. And so, you know, it always amazes me when I sit in some session and managers get together and I use the term duck. They're like ducks. They quack, 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 and there's lots of quacking and lots of talk. And we get done and it's like, okay, well, we had a good conversation. Time's
Yeah.
up.
Who's doing what by when?
Who's doing what by when? And so, in our case, you're dealing, I mean, by some scales we're small, but by our world, I mean, you're dealing with 9 manufacturing facilities where 45 of the people in our company don't speak English as a first language, and then you have meetings with the Chinese team speaking with the Dutch team or with the French Canadian team where nobody speaks English as a first language. And so, just keeping that organization aligned on how you do things it takes work and time. And the larger and more complex the organization gets, the more important that leader standard work is, because it, you know, it, I think this whole issue of leader standard work, your comment about my calendar, in terms of the culture of the organization, because these meetings that people go and sit in and they don't know why, I use the term energy vampire.
Yeah.
They suck the life out of the company,
I
and
mean, this
people
was,
sit and
yeah.
wonder, what am I doing? Why
Right.
am I here? And if you do that a lot, the degradation of the organization is hard to calculate, because you think that's what we do, and it's just a waste of time.
And
And
what's
so,
worse
you
is
know,
people even think they're making progress sometimes in those meetings. Like, it feels like activity and effort. Therefore, it must feel like we're moving the ball down the field when in fact we're oftentimes falling farther behind. So you talked earlier about my comment to you where I said, you asked me what your biggest problems were, like the top three or something. And I said, your biggest problem is you don't know how to solve problems. And that's what I was referring to, was these conversations and these meetings and these reviews and even daily management, because you had it stood up back then, but it was a lot of reporting the news. Seems like quacking is kind of like reporting the news, same kind of thing. It's people's thought process isn't following a linear structured problem solving process. Their language therefore doesn't reflect a linear problem solving process, and therefore their actions don't reflect that either. So then we get what we get, right? It's like thought, speech, action, like those things aren't linked. And it's not because people weren't trying, they were trying very hard, and people were putting in a lot of hours and working really hard. They just didn't know how. And I think they had to just be taught a different way of thinking and working and looking at their processes than they had in the past. And when they saw it, it was like a light bulb moment. You take a guy like Joe, who mentioned what 30, 40-year guy running the business. I think they found him in a field and built a company around him, and he became around the company. He was probably one of those toughest rocks to crack, and using your tilling the field analogy, he was that hard, dry Kansas dirt, to break through, and eventually he found his own lean moment where it all started making sense to him.
yeah, and that's where, you have a, person, whatever, 40, 45, 50, running a meeting as they have, however they learned along the way. you know, it can be difficult, uncomfortable, whatever you want to call it, sitting down and saying, time out, let's talk about this, and kind of breaking it down into the pieces. And as you said, ultimately pushing towards who does what by when. Um, Creating the organization where that's just what we do, and it's not uncomfortable, and you're not bad, and that takes time.
Yeah.
I mean, that takes time. And anybody who's on this phone that's a CEO or a high level executive knows that, unfortunately, everybody takes your comments, and runs down the bad road with them. So you make
Yeah.
a little comment that's designed to point out something, and the next thing you know, you have somebody who's either sending you a message or starting a meeting trying to defend what they're doing, because people are so sensitive to, I would call it coaching, people call it criticism, maybe it's in the delivery. Um, but that's just, sitting down with someone, and that's why for me, and I literally am developing the standards to how to run these reviews, so that we can explain to everybody, here's, kind of part A, part B, and like you said, ultimately it all boils down to who's going to do what by when, and what's the result we want, because nothing matters unless you get to that.
Yeah.
Nothing matters. And there's no reason for us to talk today about what new problems we have until we start with, well, who promised what the last time? Huh? And did you actually do it? And so
What I like
that
about your approach and your journey taken is you've spent time being very deliberate and intentional, and educating and training people as to the why of MDS, and not just the how and the what. And if I reflect back on, let's say, my Danaher career, it oftentimes felt like, you know, Ralph Macchio and Karate Kid, where I was being told to do something, but didn't know the reason why. Just do, just do, just do, just do. So you got a lot of these like teachable moments from people like Phil and others that it didn't feel very good, honestly, at the time. But when you had enough self-reflection and maturity to look back on that and try to understand the why, a normal rational person could put two and two together to figure it out. But if you were resistant, you would always just dismiss that kind of feedback. But what I like, what's different about your approach is from the beginning, it was never made to be this thing shrouded in mystery. Like MBS is this thing, it's nebulous. We're going to talk about why it's important. Like, why do we do problem solving? Why do we create the standard? Why do we do this? And I think the time, maybe not in your case, maybe you don't feel this way, but the time to get to where you want to get is usually shorter by spending what feels like a lot of time talking about the why that could be spent burning calories otherwise. I think paid off as a good investment for you, because I think you'll have a stronger culture in the end. You'll have people who will be more loyal, more engaged. They'll stick with the process. They'll think of this as less of this flavor of the month or Ken's new program versus this is the culture, this is the way we lead, and this is how we become successful here. What's your thoughts or reaction to that?
Yeah, actually, I mean, it was interesting as you were saying that is if there is a pivot in my messaging, the pivot has been from the what to the why. Um, and in part, as I've talked to my partners at Markel about this, they know I'm, kind of a hard-headed, if it doesn't move, just hit it harder, because at some point you'll get it to move, which isn't always the best way to deal with people. And this whole notion of focusing on the why has absolutely been a difference for me. If you take the last 2 years through the last 6 months, it's been an acceleration into the why. Because once you understand the why, the what, if people buy into the why, they're going to run to the what. And so, how do we convince them of the why? And I'm not as deft as Phil. I don't always keep my tone like Phil. And so that's been something I've had to work on. So
Yeah, want to pivot and shift gears a little bit. I think in your business and in your industry and in the type of manufacturing model that most of your companies follow, it's a unique and I would say sometimes more difficult application of lean principles than maybe a repetitive, high volume, low mix type of widget manufacturing. So for those that don't know, again, more specifically, kind of like how you guys manufacture, you're making, for all intents and purposes, customized baking equipment where the customer is specifying every piece of equipment down to the bolt size and down these kinds of things. And a lot of it is very dynamic and interchangeable and these kinds of things. But one order won't look like the next order. And if you look at all the orders that you guys produce over the course of a year, it's hard, if not impossible, to find 80-20 Paretos that stick out that say, the volume of this we can really maximize and get units of scale and efficiency and these kinds of things. So as you've thought about this journey going back to 1996, like what have you had to learn and maybe unlearn about the unique application of lean principles into the world that you guys operate, which is custom capital equipment manufacturing? Any thoughts on that?
yeah, I mean, what I would say is you're right that if somebody is making a handful of standard products and putting them on the shelves, that's an easier system. But for me, all it means is your targets are different. What you measure is different. Yes, we're big ticket capital equipment. We have all kinds of volatility in terms of orders and order rates, and we now get these, it's funny, when we started, orders were orders, and a $400,000 order was a big order for us. And now at AMF, we've got to take multiple $20+ million orders to hit our numbers. So because we do now the full line. We started just making this little piece. We now do the full line. So, just the difference between 3 of those $20 million orders and 5 of those $20 million in a year will radically change things.
Yeah.
But all that means is what you measure is different. What you measure is different. What some of your opportunities in terms of taking portions of a machine and making 10 of them and using them in multiple machines is a little bit different. But it really is as leaders, we have to figure out what processes are important to our business. And we have to, again, set the standard, clarify the standard, define what that process looks like, make it clear that that's a process everyone is going to follow, and understand what we have to measure to confirm that the process is working. I mean, one of the phrases that the guy who's the director of our business school, you talked about, the time spent on process confirmation. We have to define what that process is. And yeah, it's going to be different than if we were a pump company, but it's the same logic. What's our standard? What are we trying to accomplish? How do we measure it? And more importantly, how do we appropriately problem solve when things don't work? All those things are the same in my mind.
How important in your business do you think getting the information factory right is, because of its influence on the physical factory? When I take that information factory, I'm talking about sales going out and getting all the requirements to put a quote together, and then order entry, taking all that, entering the order, and then engineering having to come back with a proposed design and all those steps, mapping all those things out. Because I think in most industries like that, that's not the first place you would go. Like, we would probably go to the manufacturing floor and we'd spend a lot of time there, and we'd clean up our backyard, and that may take us years before we ever entertain the idea of going and looking at the non-ops part of the business. But in my opinion, like, that is, in your business, that is so influential on what happens on the floor, that if we don't get that right, there's no amount of lean that you can do on the shop floor that's going to mask or cover up the mistakes that we made in that quoting, engineering, design, RFP process. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's where a couple of years ago I was leading a Kaizen on our whole project management process. And I said, if I could only have 2 KPIs to run this business, it would be complete and accurate specs at the beginning of the process. Because as you said, knowing exactly what the customer wants and designing it right the first time is, I mean, if you don't get that part right, it is hard to catch up. And the other is that we get signed out on time, because one of the failings of our thinking in our business is that what happens, on the shop floor is really important. And once we ship, the game is over. And what I try to say is, no, in our business, shipping is the equivalent of running out through the tunnel to start the game.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
our winning and
milestones,
losing
right?
is determined by the startup. It's the startup. How does the startup? And so we set up a criteria in terms of A, B, and C level projects, and what's the standard by which we start up. So, I mean, at the end of the day, if we get the right information, and if we get signed out in time, then our process is working. But it starts with getting the right information up front. Absolutely.
So I think what you're talking about is, people wanting to put all this energy and calorie burn into manufacturing, and the real problems are in the back office. And I remember we did a value stream mapping Kaizen event for you. I don't know if you remember this. It was in the Netherlands at your Trump Group business. And when we mapped the end-to-end order entry, sales proposal, all the way to commissioning and install and final billing, and we looked at all the stages in between, and this organization, I think, several of your organizations are milestone billing type of commercial models where you have to do certain parts like produce the drawing package, you can bill. Once you build it, you can bill a certain amount. Once you ship it, you can bill a certain amount. And I remember vividly that the shape of the working process of all the orders going through the value stream looked like a bathtub or a skateboard ramp.
Right.
Where all the whip was in the front end being held up by waiting for drawings, and it was sort of like this churn of back and forth between sales, customer, engineering, things getting stuck there. And on the back end, where we couldn't invoice the final payment because of all these issues around commissioning or what we call final install. And then, it's sort of like smoothed out in the middle, and then two big tails at the end. So, does that resonate?
Yeah, no, I mean that, and we now have our, fancy dynamics system and our toll gates, so you can actually literally see that in the process. But yeah, I mean that's, but it comes back to that's why the principles of lean apply anyway, because getting the proper information is all about being clear as to what the standard is. And what we found to a large extent was, the engineers are unhappy because the salespeople aren't giving them what they want, but they haven't made it clear as to what they need. So, making sure that those standards are clear for every one of our product lines. And it takes work, and it's not easy, and it's not a lot of fun, but it just takes work. And then it takes diligence to keep reinforcing that we need this information. Because the problem is, if we don't have that up front, that's what leads to the checkout problems at the end. The system isn't doing what it needs to do, and we don't get signed out. And at the end of the day, I try to explain to our folks, we're not in business to sell machines. We're in business to help our customers make money, and they've got to run those machines. So they want us out of there.
You ready to take some questions from the audience?
Sure.
So one of the questions, for those of you that are following along here, you can enter your questions in the chat panel here down below. You'll see two little bubbles. So you can type your questions in there, and I'll moderate those, Ken. So Ken, one of the questions is, as you reflect on your lean journey, what have been some of the biggest lessons learned that you've experienced?
I think the biggest thing is the need for the CEO to be personally engaged in the details of lean, especially in the early days. You can't just delegate. I guess if you had a situation, kind of a CEO, COO situation, and you had a really strong COO, in that case, as long as that COO was personally engaged, you might be able to make that work. But there's got to be a high level executive who is just unrelenting and willing to coach, to teach, to look at KPIs, to press people on why these are the right or the wrong KPI. You just have to be willing to do that and do it over and over and over to try to get movement in an organization. And that's where early on, I had the PowerPoint and the rah-rah speech down, but I wasn't doing that hard work, and I didn't in the early days have an operations team who embraced this to do the work in my stead. And so that's why there was this period of growing companies or buying companies and acquiring them. And it wasn't until I personally got involved and we brought in, people whose day jobs it was to keep pounding on this, that we had the movement. So it's all personal. It's all, let's face it, if you're the CEO, you're responsible for everything, whether you know it or not, whether you touch it or not. And so if you want a lean transformation, that's something that you must personally engage in.
Sort of the variant of the same question. What's been the toughest pill or medicine to take on this lean journey where you've had to sort of like change your thinking about something that was very uncomfortable for you?
saying goodbye to people who had been very important to you up until then.
In what
People
way?
who were there, people who were there, um, in the early days, people who were there who had done all kinds of things, worked hard, made sacrifices, but weren't were in roles that they had to make that leap and just weren't able to make that leap. That was a very difficult, it's a very difficult but necessary thing to do.
You think you spent more time with those folks maybe than you should have, or the right amount of time?
In I don't know. I mean, I'm a person that if I'm going to err, I'm going to err by giving you a chance versus, err if you've, if you've been a person who's made a contribution over years, and you're, um, if you will, doing the best you can, but there's a skills gap, I'm going to work to give you a chance. Um, I think I've probably become less patient over time.
Yeah,
Um, just because it's hard. It's it if this is a mindset that you've not been trained, and if it's not a mindset that you've used over your career, it's a hard thing to grasp. Um, it's a hard thing to pick up. It just is.
really.
I don't know. It does, if you get it, you get it, and it doesn't seem hard, but it can just take a while for people to grasp it.
On a related topic, you talked about one of the big learnings is bringing people in with this skill set already into Markel. So the
Mhm.
question is about what qualities do you look for in the leaders today that you bring into Markel to fit with the culture of lean and MBS that you're trying to build? So how have you
Yeah,
had
boy,
to the interview process and those kinds of things?
yeah, no, that's a great one. I mentioned a little bit earlier about the three bears. I think that the first MBS leader we had was too hot. He had to be hot given the role. Um, the second person we brought in was a little too cold in terms of more facilitation than agitation. And I think the leader that we have now really he has that right balance. And I think that for me, it's about, have you demonstrated lean in an operating role so that when you come into an operating role, um, it's something that we can have confidence from your background that you will be able to do the role in the foreground. I mean, we have a situation right now in one of our facilities where we've brought this young person in, who had a really good lean background, and he has a great personality about him, so he's able to bring people along. And what we've seen in a short period of time is really astonishing. So I mean, the phrase head and heart, we talk about head and heart, and Markel and the Markel style is what we really kind of build our social values on, if you do, and MBS and lean is what we bring our thinking. And so we look for somebody who has the mindset and the personality around people, but they've demonstrated it over time. That's really the key.
This question's about Markel Ventures and sort of the expectations that they set for you as the CEO of one
Mhm.
of their platform businesses. So, what, if anything, has the way Markel Ventures runs their companies
Mhm.
done to help or hinder your lean journey in terms of its ability to accelerate it, do what you want or not do what you want? I think it's
Yeah.
more of a question around how hands-on are they, and
The Anybody who joins our company is stunned at the autonomy we have from Markel. Stunned, and um, part of my, kind of personal story is, we were the first, so I've been around the longest. Um, they, so I think that there's a degree of freedom that maybe we have that others don't, but the freedom we have is, I mean, we have a board meeting every quarter that used to last 2 hours. I asked them if we could extend it to three as long as I provided lunch. They've never set a budget for me one time. because the philosophy of Tom Gaynor, who's now the CEO of Markel, is that budgets are tools that leaders use to run their business. So he wants me to set whatever budget I want to set to have tools to run the business. My compensation is driven by growth in earnings over time, 3-year average return, growth in earnings. So, no one year makes you, no one year hurts you. What is that
So
trend
even
over
the goal
time?
of 3-year average earnings and growth is a long-term view that most publicly traded companies don't, give their CEOs of their businesses that kind of KPI.
No, that's right. In Markel, at the Markel level, it's 5 years. They do a 5-year
Oh, wow.
trail. Their compensation is based on 5-year returns on capital. And I went to them and I said, 5 years is too long of a period that you don't feel enough, love for a good year or kick for a bad year. Let's shrink it to 3 years. So I had to get them to do that. Their point is any, especially in a business like ours, but any business, it's going to have issues. I mean, even if your trend is upward, you're going to have ups and downs. And so their whole point is ignore the ups and downs, do the right thing over the long term. And so what they have done has charged me to, I mean, I used to own part of the company. I've sold and am winding that down, but I treated it like I owned all of it back in the beginning days, even though I never did. And I treat it like I still own it all. And that is a result of the way we do things at Markel and why they've kind of, figured out how to grow this from where we were, which was around 50 million of revenue, to now up over 6 billion of revenue. So that's really the magic of Markel Ventures, is they bring in companies that come from a private ownership situation and are able to keep that same kind of feeling and independence and commitment. So yeah, it's people think it's crazy. I have to get their approval to buy something. I have to get their approval if I want to change banks. I think I have to get approval if I want to spend CapEx over, I don't know, $1 million, something like that. But I've never asked for anything that I didn't get. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, and then send us dividends. I mean, because since we don't have debt, we should be generating cash. And if we can redeploy it in ways that creates returns, please do. They'd love for us to keep investing capital, but if not, send it back to them.
This question is about development of future leaders. So how are you developing internally future lean leaders of Markel Business System?
Well, we have a program that takes about 20, 25 people from all around the world. We don't involve China because of time zones and language. We have that set up separately. But we have the Markel Business System Leadership University.
And it's a physical
And
place that people come
it's
to.
we hold it at our facilities. A lot of it's done virtually during the year because we have people from all over the place, all around the world, literally, in terms of Latin America and Europe and Canada and those things. So there's a kickoff that's at one of our facilities. There's a closing session that's at one of our facilities where we also go and visit somebody who has, demonstrated lean success. We've been to the Toyota facility and the Subaru facility up near Indianapolis. So a lot of it's virtually, and it's, just daily visual management and standard work and all of those things. As you said, the wax on, wax off. What are the basics that they need to learn to go back and do their role? We're soon at the point where it becomes a gating mechanism for you to be promoted. That's really what I want, is to get to where people know that, for me to get moved to that next level, I need to go through MBS University and be certified, if you will. So we're getting close to that point, and that's really, from a culture point of view, that's what we want, is for people to really want to be in that because they realize that it's good for them and good for their career.
Yeah. And I think some of the instructors are you and others, right, at the L1 level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's right. And one of the things that, here we're getting ready to have kind of how do you lead one of these business reviews, and I want the presidents to teach those, because as you know, leaders teach, and one of the best ways to learn something is to teach it. So it's part of what we're trying to do. And they do come. They always come to the graduation, week and listen to the report outs and those things. So we try to engage our leaders in that.
What's one piece of advice you give out to a CEO who is contemplating whether or not to take the leap and initiate their own lean journey here in 2025?
Make sure you're ready to do whatever it takes before you start, and understand that it's going to be 5 times harder than you think it's going to be. But but also I would say understand. I don't know how you lead a company in this crazy volatile world without a lean mindset. I don't know how to do that. So, is it hard? Yes. Is it harder than you ever imagined? Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Well, you have to explain the same thing over and over and over. Yes, 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 yes. But what's the alternative? That you have an organization that's not focused on actuals and standards and gaps and problem solving. I mean, that's worth the pain. That's worth the pain. Yeah.
Ken, it's great to catch up with you. It's good to see you again. And we'll have to do this sometime again in the near future. So I want to thank Ken. And before we bid farewell to all of you, I encourage you to take a moment to reflect on the valuable insights and practical advice that Ken has shared with us today, and how you can apply these lessons, more importantly, to your own organization's lean journey. If you have any further questions or would like to explore the possibilities of initiating or enhancing your own lean transformation, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Our team's here to support you on every step of the way. And once again, I want to give our heartfelt gratitude to Ken for sharing his experiences and expertise with us. And we're grateful for his contribution to this interview series. And we hope to see you next month for another installment of Lean Catalyst. We will be back here about the middle of March, and you can always watch these sessions. They get posted on our YouTube channel and then also on our leanfocus.com webpage, usually about a day or two after the videos are finished. This one will do some editing before we post due to the technical challenges. But thanks, Ken. It was great as always, and best of luck to you on your continuation of your lean journey and all of your personal learnings. And as you get ready to steer into your next chapter of your life, which is retirement, which we now learn what the date is. So, all right.
I will.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Take care. Bye now.